All right, welcome to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. Speaking of white lightning, Sam, that's the last time I trust a guy just because he's got a nice beard and says he knows about whiskey.
Yeah, well, the worst, when we talk about politics all the time and health and fitness and religion, all these things that separate people and make them angry at each other. The worst Facebook page I've ever been a part of was Houston Bourbon Club. Their opinions were religion, and just like beer snobs and music snobs, and you just go down the list. Some things aren't for everybody. And the great thing about taste is we do experience things differently. There are
Hmm.
universals. We do like a combination of sugar, carbs, fat, and salt. Those things are palatable to some degree, but the variation outside of that little bit of natural urge we have just to get our calories, it's kind of the sky's the limit.
Yeah. So I go to Total Wine because I'm too lazy to go down to Specs, even though I like it better, but it's twice as far. Um, And I'm not a wine person, but every once in a while I'll make something that ne really needs wine to make it work. You know, a recipe that really needs wine. And every
Like a
time I've done
marriage.
that, yes.
Yeah.
Every time I've asked for help with that, I've been very pleased with the recommendations. So I went in and they used to carry the shower fire, but only a little bit, and then the distributor stopped distributing up here completely. So
Hmm.
I asked, well, what is something like that? And I specifically said I wanted an infused cinnamon whiskey. And this guy says, okay, well, I really like this. Give this a try. And I didn't look at the bottle because I trusted the guy until I got home and opened it, and it smelled like liquid Red Hots, which
Hmm.
is why I never liked cinnamon whiskey until you gave me the Shirefire and explained the difference between flavored and infused. And sure enough, I looked down at the bottle and it says cinnamon flavored whiskey, which is
Which
specifically what I asked not to have.
which cinnamon is one that blows me away that they're still insisting on using flavoring, because you use flavoring because it's cheaper and readily available and easy to store, and you can have it
Mm.
on hand to just throw in there. So it's the go-to on the cheap. But cinnamon is cheap. One stick goes a long way, and it stores. I
It's
don't
tree
understand.
bark. Just keep it dry.
It's not any more expensive to use regular cinnamon
Yeah.
than actually going through a process that started with regular cinnamon to make this sweet artificial.
The only thing I can think is time, is how much more time does it take to
Well, it
allow
should be
something to
aged, right?
infuse? Well, that's true. It's
If
whiskey,
it's
so it should
bourbon,
be
it should
aged
spend
anyway.
some time in a barrel, anyways. I mean, how much do you need? I think when I did cucumber infused vodkas, it only takes like 3 days. So how much time do you need? If you've already aged it five
Hmm.
years, what does 3 days matter? What does a week matter? You don't, in fact, when you're infusing, you don't want to leave it in there too long because then it gets kind of a rancid, over the
Mm.
top taste. So I don't know. If it's time, that seems a pretty shoddy excuse for me.
Yeah.
But speaking of, we're all generally the same, but a little bit different. We promised to do this time, and I'll bring
I
back
was gonna say,
the.
speaking of rancid things, I don't want to talk about.
Oh no, you've got the rancid stuff.
Yeah.
This is the softer opening, but new guidance: use drug surgery early for obesity in kids. Guidance by who? As Critical Drinker would say, don't know, but we can kind of parse things out because we have a new obesity czar, and her name is, whoops, wrong one. I'm not going to try to pronounce the first name because apparently it's racist if you get it wrong. Dr. Stanford. Uh, and if you look at her biography and resume here, this is her Harvard page and this is her LinkedIn page. It is actually amazing. So qualified to do the job? Absolutely. Now, where do things go wrong is the question, because she was just on 60 Minutes, and here's a story about the story, talking about how if you take obesity and the causes of it, Lifestyle, exercise, and food choices is a small sliver of the pie. And the biggest sliver of the pie is just your genetics. And we say, well, that doesn't make any sense. And we'll go into the why. That let's go ahead and cover her first, and then we'll go into the why she's wrong, or at least mostly wrong. But that was her 60 Minutes interview. This is an article from Women's Health, which starts off going right and then goes way wrong. But why would somebody who is so educated, if we bring back her bio here, and very impressive in her advancement through the current career path in medicine and then obesity studies after that, why would that person be so wrong? Well, this article touches on it in the beginning with her relationship with Wegovy manufacturer, which is the company that makes the pills in the front of the picture I just showed you for the headline.
Oh, gee.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
So let's go to that relationship. This is public info. This is not a news story by any organization. Because she is a public figure, she has to disclose these things. Same doctor, Dr. Stanford here. This was, oh my goodness, payments last year, 2021 anyways. They went up a lot over the course of several years. And let's look who they're from. Pharmaceutical company, pharmaceutical company, pharmaceutical company, pharmaceutical company, pharmaceutical company. And oh my gosh, the same ones that make the Wegovy and those the anti-diabetic, which are now being used as anti-obesity drugs. So all of a sudden, she's talking about how there's nothing you can do in your life to change things, or at least very, very, very little. At the same time, she's being funded by a company that wants to sell you a drug to take care of the problem. Let that sink in for a second. So go back to her qualifications. You cannot tell me this woman does not know better. This is not some humanities obesity studies, fat studies person that got propped up by politics, that was trained in the fat shaming version of fat studies, not the scientific version of what actually is obesity and how to combat it. So we all want to, you hesitate to apply motive. But if you know someone knows better, and then you tie the financial part to it, you can apply a little bit of motive.
That's insidious because, well, it's bad enough when you're giving someone just bad advice or selling them, snake oil, selling them supplements they don't need or whatever. Prescription drugs have side effects. The one that really ticked me off was surgery. Now, the lap band surgery has become such a fad, and it's really disturbing to me because this is a major surgery. That means there are going to be major side effects. There's going to be an aftercare regimen that you're going to have to go through to take care of that, to adjust to what they have done to your GI tract. There are potential complications, not just with the surgery, but again, with the aftercare down the road, you can have problems. And you're recommending that for children?
Okay, so let me push this to another realm where we have, so this is where independent clinical studies come in. So we both follow, I bought you that book from Stuart McGill, right? So Stuart McGill, The Back Mechanic, is the book I bought you, but he was the head of the McGill Back Institute. Some things are named after him in our industry. He's been around and is one of the best when it comes to that specific. He's probably great in a lot of arenas, but when you talk about that specific thing, if he says it, you can almost take it as truth with just a little bit of maybe tweaking here and there. But what they did, and the McGill Institute did this themselves. Of course, you're not going to get government funding for something like this. they instituted something called virtual surgery. And what they did with these back patients was had them come in, go through the consult. Uh, when it looked like it was something that would normally be recommended for surgery, they do the pre-surgery stuff, the don't take your meds for this, blah, 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 all the pre-surgery stuff. Then they wouldn't do the surgery, and they would do everything you would have done after the surgery, from the rest to the rehab, but all the way up. So everything is the same as if you went and had surgery, except you didn't have the surgery. And the success rate of that was through the roof. Why don't they do that with lap band, or at least do a clinical trial where you compare the results of just doing the surgery versus the pre and the post? Because there is a process that you have to do before you have the lap band. It's 30-30, it's called 30-30 or something, where you do 30 days of this certain eating habit, because otherwise you'll blow up your stomach as soon as you're out of the surgery. And you have to go through this whole process. Are we monitoring how much weight these people lose in the first 30 days before they have the surgery? Or are we just going ahead and cutting them because they're scheduled and it pays well? You need an independent obesity specialized kind of place to do that, because when it comes to pharma funding things or the government funding things, you're never going to get that. But we should see that in that arena, because you're going to take all the variables out. If someone can't lose weight in that 30-30 program, you know what? You're a great candidate. That should be the evaluation process to be a candidate, not the pre after you've already been told you're a candidate.
Especially for children, because all right, so using myself as an example, uh losing weight has been difficult because uh due to my nihilistic depression and my aching back, I spend way too much time in this position. Well, that means my resting metabolism, my base metabolism is really low, which means my maintenance calories should be really low as well. Um, Children, especially once you start going through puberty, is the inverse of that. Because your body is growing, it is using a ton of energy. You should not be obese as a child if you are even remotely active. So if you are, then the first thing you should look at is lifestyle. And to your point, before you start going into pharmaceutical or surgical interventions, all right, well, let's do some kind of protocol. Are you losing weight? Okay, we need to stick with this protocol or just this protocol, not just go right into the pharmaceutical and surgical interventions. Oh
Okay.
dear.
Well, let's go where this kind of gets some things right and then goes so wrong. So this is, again, I hate to say she's doing this out of naivety just because of those credentials, but bringing up, and this is during the interview, that if you're born to parents who have obesity, you have 50 to 85% likelihood of having the disease yourself. We've discussed this fallacy of research in past things about other topics, because we have a lot of things that go into it. Obese parents are more likely to have an obesity promoting lifestyle, and they're more likely to pass that lifestyle onto their kids. So there's a huge confounder right there. This is the toasters cause pregnancy fallacy of the Japanese research, that it just turns out that people that were ready to have a family were more likely to have a toaster. So it's where the parents' habits bleed down to the children. So that's fallacious from the get-go. Now this next doctor they bring in, Dr. Carl, gets a little bit better, where I'm going to go back to this part of it, because this is he kind of goes wrong and then goes right again, and then the whole thing derails. But the answer is it's complex, right? It's a complex interaction of both our genes and our environments and habits. Okay, correct. Obviously, we do have a genetic component. We've got a prenatal component, and we've got a developmental component. All of those things play into it, but by how much, right? So
Hmm.
let's start with the genetic component. Don't look at the obesity rate as it is. Look at the obesity rate as a trend over time. We're skyrocketing.
Hmm.
We went from somewhere around 32% to 41% in less than 5 years. We're skyrocketing. It's the rate is climbing at an exponential rate because that was already double what the increase was before that and double what the increase was before that. And so it's not only going up, it's going up at a faster rate. Our genetics are not changing that fast. If you know anything about genetics, that's a long process.
That's a good point.
We're not including we're not changing our DNA through natural selection or even sexual selection at a rate that could account for that. So we can already say, well, it's to get the genetic component, we would have to look at the baseline rate from over the course of 1,000 years.
Hmm.
And if before modern technology, we had some sort of creeping trend up, and we could probably say that's going to be what the original trend was. And so now we need the delta between what it's doing and what that is to say this is lifestyle, or this is prenatal environment, or this is developmental. Right. So all of that big delta that's going to be there, and I guarantee you it's going to be most of that number because of how slow genetics creep. We can't change that fast genetically. That's part of the problem. We haven't adapted to our modern lifestyles. We still have the the urges, the dietary habits of someone who is looking for food and starving most of the time.
Or having to work really hard every day to
Mm-hmm.
grow your food, make your food.
Yeah. So that's the realist side of how much genetics is playing into it from that point of view. But genetics is important because I just told you we had a genetic predisposition to find food, gorge on food, and store food and get fat. We just don't have to do it anymore. So overcoming genetics, yes, but that also still plays into the willpower crowd because we have to find a way to overcome that part of our genetics. And that part of our genetics is not different between an obese person and a non-obese person.
And you, sentiments and articles like this are playing on the struggle that you have if you are obese, because we've talked about this before.
Oh, it's miserable. It's just like
The
dealing with addiction or anything like that.
the
It's
the witchcraft mechanisms that are going on in your body when you are obese make it very difficult to get out of that, because
especially if you've
psychologic
been doing it a long time.
especially if you've been doing it psychologically, you're in a rut. Physically, it's difficult to get up and move around. Physically, it's difficult to change your diet. Psychologically, that food is probably a crutch, and
Well,
your
and you
body.
shift your hormonal balance because
So so
fat
your
cells
body
become
and mind create a negative feedback loop. It was, the inverse of that was one of your points when you brought up your little whiteboard of why we strength train. Well, one of the reasons is because lean mass, muscle mass, takes more energy to maintain, more base energy. So your metabolism's going to be, more efficient, going to be working more. If you're obese, it's not. So it's going to be more difficult to, break that wall and get moving in the right direction, which is why we should be spending more of our energy on keeping people from getting obese in the first place. Not this hyper focus on obesity and excusing it and trying to come up with quick fixes for it. No, let's focus more energy on not getting there in the first place, because to people who are already there, it's going to be really difficult, and you need to accept that fact first
Mhm.
and then understand, but it can be done, and here's how.
So I just recently started doing as my daily routine an ice plunge first thing in the morning. Get out of bed, either jump in the freezing cold pool, which is freezing right now, or the cold shower. I did both. And actually, I think the shower was more miserable because the cold pool, your body starts adapting to it because everything
Mhm.
happens at once. Where the shower, you got to kind of keep moving around to hit all the spots. So the initial adaptation process took about a minute longer in the shower, which I'm only up to 2 minutes of being able to freeze right now. So, but the key to this, and this is where it connects to what we're talking about, is the first thing I do in the morning is purposefully wade into something miserable, which is one of the biggest parts of the benefit of this. I just I stressed myself out on purpose. Acute stress, which is the good kind of stress, but what part of my day is going to be worse than that, right? Well, the same thing goes with weight loss. Sometimes you got to just rip the Band-Aid and get through that stressful part of the beginning of it, and then work on strategies to develop good habits over time. So that's tough. Just like that freezing cold water is the last thing you want to be feeling for the whole amount of time you're in there. It's a longer process, which makes it even harder to do with diet. Going to take probably, if you're our age, so 43, are you 44 yet?
I don't know. Am I? No, not yet.
Okay. So 43, and say 23 years of that life, you've been drinking Dr. Peppers and eating double chicken fried steak and mashed potatoes and cookie dough for dessert, and put on a hefty amount of weight. 20 years you've been doing that. So that would probably, you'd be a 300-pound individual if that was your normal everyday kind of lifestyle. All of a sudden, ripping that Band-Aid is going to be like a raging opium addict just cutting cold turkey. That sucks. And this is true. Food can stimulate you as much as heroin. And the longer you've been doing it, the harder it is to break that. You would feel like you're about to die, literally. That sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. It, I referenced that when we talked a little bit about intermittent fasting a long time ago, is that when you first start it, you're not starving, but your body is screaming that it's starving. And it really sucks those first several days to get through that, that initial barrier.
Okay, so let me summarize and close out the genetics, but then show one thing where they went wrong in the article with genetics. We do have things about our genetics that predisposition us to be fat, but we all do. Where they would be correct is some people to a greater degree than others. And it probably goes along that genetic line where we traced our family history, where some people were probably in a more abundant place than others, where if you had food access every day for thousands of years, then you're probably not going to have the same cravings or fat storage predisposition as someone who maybe was in a desert area or a very cold environment where you didn't get to eat often. Inuits, they're more predisposition to store fat, right? Because they would eat a whale and then not eat for a long time. That kind of thing. So yes, there is predisposition, some people more than others, but we're all mostly the same and we're all designed for that. We all have to deal with the same struggle. That being said, there are some people that we all know this person, this anecdote, they can eat whatever they want and they don't seem to gain weight. That exists. The other end of the spectrum exists, but for the most part, it's a bell curve and we're all pretty much in the middle. Now, where the article goes wrong with some of this is they go back to anecdote, and that's where I'm going to go back up to close out genetics. They bring up these rare mutations.
Oy.
And this is what bothers me, because this is something where you can use something that's absolutely correct and still not be correct, because, well, we can look up these mutations and the prevalence even in severely obese people is only 2.5%. And
2 to 5%.
oh, so yeah, 2 to 5%. And you
And that's
compare,
severely obese children, not
right.
even just severely obese children.
Yeah, so 2 to 5% of the 40 something percent that are considered, or no, severely obese is only like 13%. So 2 to 5. So we're talking about a small number within a number. And that is less in not obese people, but it still exists in not obese
Hmm.
people. So yes, you can have a disposition, but there are no limitations. There are only considerations. So let's close out genetics, and they're talking about the environment where obese parents, and we'll go back up again here, obese parents have obese kids. Let's talk prenatal environment. If, and we know this from famine studies, post World War I, post World War II, especially in Scandinavian countries in that area, if your mother is starving, so let's take it back even a little bit. There's a war going on when a woman is pregnant. That war is how much the child takes as far as nutrients and how much the mother keeps. And actually, the mother, we like, mothers are very sacrificing just for going through the process, but internally, their body's fighting to keep resources. And depending on the genetics of the father, the baby is more and more trying to take resources because fathers with a certain gene produce babies that suck the life out of a mother to produce a big baby. But that's a whole nother story. But the interplay is the mother and the baby are fighting for resources, and hopefully that fight is pretty equal and resulting is the just right amount for that baby. But when mother is starving, it's not a good strategy to give everything to the baby internally because you always have the chance to make more babies. And that sounds sad, but that's just internally what your body's doing. If you are born in that situation to a famished mother or even a malnourished mother, your baseline metabolism going into adulthood is lower than everybody else. Which means if you go from a poverty-stricken birth to a normal life, you have to eat less to not get fat because your baseline, your resting metabolic rate is lower than everybody else. So if you were to come to me and I did a calorie calculator and you have that prenatal environment, you're going to have to be way under whatever that number comes out
Hmm.
because I've got population averages. You are less than population. So those people are more likely to get fat because, just over time, society has made it easier to get food. So this is something that does exist. But are you going to have an overweight parent if they were famished while you were in the womb? No, you're going to have a skinny parent.
Just that number, as I sit here and stare at it, is annoying to me. It's a 35% gap. It signals to me, well, that's not a very good number.
Well, that's probably because they had like 50 correlation studies and they took the lowest number and they took the highest number and just called that the range, or maybe threw out the outliers in either direction.
Hmm.
This is normal for population studies, especially when you have so many multiple correlates. But the point about the famished parents are more likely to produce a child that is genetically, or that is genetically then prenatally predispositioned to get fat, actually reduces the number of those kids that exist to parents that were fat to begin with. So you're actually shifting the number down on that. Uh, so genetics plays a role, but not as much as we'd say. Prenatal environment actually goes against the parents are fat, you're going to be fat. So then it becomes about lifestyle. And when it becomes about lifestyle, now we've got so many other things that go into it. Development. What are the parents' habits? What did they do at a very young age? If you give a kid sodas when they're 1 year old, they're going to start not only not burning the brown fat that they need to as a young child, but they're going to start producing fat cells, which never, ever, ever go away. So now parents could be setting you up for a long process. So all of these things play into it. Your genetics, which we all, again, a bell curve, but we all sit in mostly the same place. Prenatal environment. Sorry if you were born that way, but it's not, again, it's not damning. You just got to eat less because you have a more efficient metabolism. And then development. Well, we can't change what your parents did with you when you were, born to however long you became aware of your own eating habits. So now we go from there. And if you acknowledge those things instead of just throwing a pill at them, we can go in the right direction. There's one more place I want to go with this, but I give you a little time to
No,
chime in.
go on. That's summed up my thoughts pretty much as well.
Okay, and this is where this Dr. Carl goes a little off, because this statement here, this is true to some extent, but I would love to see what studies they talked about, and I found minimal stuff just using keyword searches. But my problem is optimal diet and exercise may be difficult to achieve with a genetic predisposition.
Optimal
And
diet and exercise are difficult to achieve for anyone.
yeah, but the further statement, hence why even with optimal effort, a significant number will still have weight gain and obesity. We don't know that because there's two big things there. He uses the word optimal diet and exercise. Do we even know what optimal diet and exercise is? It's probably not what our government is
Yeah.
recommending to us, which is probably the way the studies were done. This is why I want to do the studies or look at the studies, because are they RDA recommendations? We've discussed over and over how many times the experts have been wrong on what
Yeah.
optimal diet is. And there's an individuality component. Maybe you gave the wrong person the wrong diet. Maybe that person that stayed obese under your optimal diet would do well under a keto diet. Or maybe they would do well under, maybe they're predispositioned from ancestry to shift towards veganism. They make protein out of vegetables very well, and they get fat real quick when they eat high fat foods. We don't know that. You need to take it down to the individual level. And if we treat obesity as a population thing, then we can parse out the individuals. And then that way we can kind of progress forward.
Well, the number you showed earlier is already a red flag to me of, well, what do you mean significant? Because we've already looked at the prevalence of the genetics that you referenced earlier, Dr. Carl, and that was a small number of a small number.
Mm-hmm.
2 to 5% for severely obese children, 1% for severely obese adults. So how is that significant?
Well, it's
I,
scientific
I
significant. Remember, significance and magnitude are different.
yes.
That's a word that he's using, and we'll give him the benefit of the
Well,
doubt.
he's
Maybe
conflating
he
because
thinks people understand his language. A scientist will come out and say those words and forget that the public has a different meaning for that word. Significance to the public implies a big number. It implies it's significant to society, not significant as in I can repeat the results scientifically. So diet, we don't know what optimal diet is. We still don't know what optimal diet is. So now you can't make that statement that these people will gain weight no matter what. Workout. I got a great example of how we still don't know what optimal workout is, right? Exercise. What's the standard you're putting them to? We know from CrossFit that we've been freaking wrong about that up until recently for women. The biggest part of the CrossFit success is not just that it looks fun. It's the fact that women were getting badass results from it because women handle volume well and they needed intensity in their life. They needed to get rid of the pink leg warmers and put down the little 2-pound dumbbell and actually go out and do something intense to get the greatest result. Again, we have our criticisms of CrossFit, but that was one of the biggest advancements they did. How many of these studies were just standard aerobics based or cardiovascular based studies saying it's optimal exercise, because that's still what
Get
the
on a
experts
bike and
say.
keep your heart within the range for 20 to 30 minutes.
Yeah, in the fat burning zone. And so what exercise programs have you been putting them through? We also learned from CrossFit you don't need a lot of time. One of the biggest sells for CrossFit is you can come in and do the WOD. If you get done in 15 minutes, you still got it. If you get done in an hour and a half, well, guess what? You need to get faster. And so the time component is less, the equipment component is less. Are we accounting for that with this statement that you just made that is going to shape, because you did it in one of the bigger magazines that was going to influence opinion, that is one of the things that our new obesity czar is going to go by?
Yes, yeah, and not just a major magazine that's going to influence a lot of opinions, but you're talking about a government official who's going to shape official policy,
Mm-hmm.
which more and more, as we have learned in the past couple of years, more and more people are unwilling or afraid to go against guidelines, and the guidelines are becoming rigid regulations.
Oh, I need to find it because in the omnibus package, the FDA is attempting to be able to the same thing they did in California, where they can take your medical license if you go off label, basically.
Mm,
And they're trying to make that a federal thing. There's apparently 19 lines on it in the omnibus, but that's 5,000 pages to
yeah.
search through. Yeah. But that's what I had. Our new obesity director, or whatever her term is. I know she's part of the being responsible for dietary guidelines. Uh, this is her opinion. Her opinion is that how can you be in charge of dietary guidelines if you think personally that it doesn't even make hardly a difference?
Yeah,
She
it's a good
stated
point.
out she made it, she said it's a small sliver of the pie. Well, which sliver of that is the funding in your pie that we just showed there? Because uh, they just want to throw pills at everybody. There is a select few people that would benefit from that, and I would say that that's actually at the example we brought up, the 43-year-old that's had bad habits for a long time. Sometimes you've been in that 300 400-pound body so long that you need a kickstart, and that's the person I would use that with.
Hmm.
I have a client that is taking one of those, and all of a sudden after 3 years of training is finally losing weight. And this is a person that would, before this, wake up in the middle of the night without waking up and go eat half a pizza in their sleep. So there are people that benefit from this. There are people that have issues that maybe need a medical kickstart, especially if you're pre-diabetic, because that's what these were
Hmm.
originally invented for. When you're pre-diabetic, your insulin does work different. So you might have to get that back to good before you can get results. But for children, no, we still have time.
Hmm.
We still have time for good interventions.
Because those bad habits have not become
A lifestyle.
so ingrained that they can't be shifted to good habits with relative ease, relative to the adult who's been like that for a decade or decades.
Well, you do see a lot, especially uh, in lower socioeconomic status areas. The idea from parents that you feel like you're depriving your kid if you don't let them have the thing
Hmm.
they want, and you kind of feel so bad for so many other things that you give in on the food thing because it's easy, and that's a hard one to overcome,
Hmm.
especially since you feel like you're doing something good for them now, but you have to detach yourself to see what you're doing for them in the long term.
Yeah. All right. Well, rant complete about that. Shall we move on to the thing I've been procrastinating on because I don't want to talk about it?
Yeah, and you're going to take the lead on this one, and I have my own thoughts. Depending on where you go, I'll determines my presentation.
So I I teased this last time. It's awful. Let me share. I'm gonna share the article just to set up the story. Now, I only vaguely remember hearing about this when it first happened. And
It was all over the Twitters.
then Town Hall, which is a right-leaning uh publication, They are doing an investigative months-long investigation. So, and they set up what's going on here. A months-long town hall investigation reveals disturbing new details about the affluent LGBTQ activist couple accused of sodomizing their young adopted sons, now ages 9 and 11, and distributing homemade child pornography of the sexual abuse. Half a year after the shocking story made national news, Town Hall is the only outlet following up on the criminal case in Georgia that has since seen zero headlines written about it. We found that it's far, far worse than what was first reported. Not only did the married men allegedly rape the two boys who were adopted through a Christian special needs adoption agency, they were pimping out their children to nearby pedophiles in Atlanta area suburbs, Town Hall's follow-up investigation discovered. Recorded jailhouse calls, a trove of never-before-seen court documents, and testimony from a family member who spoke exclusively with Town Hall uncovered the extent of the physical and emotional trauma the two elementary school-aged brothers endured, as well as the red flags that the state overlooked during the same-sex couple's faster than expected adoption process. Um, so if you want to if you want to get a summary of it, I sent you the Rumble link of the Steve Deace show, and I think I told you this timestamp for anyone who wants to just skip to that. Uh, go to and I'll just show the link. I won't share it because it never plays right. So here's the story of um this when the Steve Deace show talking about it. So it starts at 11:30, and so you'll get a summary of it, and they play a lot of the recorded calls that the town hall uh, article referenced. And what is so disturbing and sickening about it that really jumped out at me is I don't think we shared the video. I read the transcript of the guy who ran over the 18-year-old kid after a political argument because he said the guy was part of a white supremacist radical right-wing militia or some crap like that. And in his bail hearing, all he could talk about was how this was ruining his life, that he had a good life,
Mm-hmm.
and the arrest, the trial, excess bail was going to ruin his life and ruin everything he's worked for. A kid is dead, you asshole. Well, that's these recordings times 10, because all this person can talk about is how traumatic it was for them to be woken up in the middle of the night and handcuffed and thrown in the back of a cop car while they searched their house and went all over everything, and how terrible people are going to think of them. And it was all about them and about how terrible it was that this was happening to them. Who gives a damn about the kids?
Mm-hmm.
It was the same mentality as that guy who killed someone. And you can make a good case that this was worse than killing someone because these two boys are going to have to live with horrific trauma for the rest of their lives because of what these two people, not these two people, because it turns out it was a bigger deal than that. All of these
Well,
people did, and
still
we hope
them,
there's more
because
charges to come.
if they pimped them out, then
Uh-huh.
it would
Uh-huh.
never have happened without them. So it is still those two people. The other people were situationally involved in their own right, need to be punished, but you still it still never happens without the initial two. And I read all the way through, and that's why I'm a little bit tired today, because
Yeah.
I didn't see it until I was already laying down for bed. But uh, what I saw on the Twitter webs around this was getting very disturbing, because it was making it a very anti-gay adoption issue. And that's not the issue at all here. The issue is the fact that the right steps weren't taken to vet the system or to vet the people in the system. And then where was the freaking money coming from? Those were the two big issues that I saw reading all of that. We can talk about, the community and everything going forward, but it's being used as a cudgel in another direction from where the actual issues are. The issues are the adoption system and how they're being influenced by the politics around it, and where the freak the money was coming from, because that's what allowed them to basically do what they did, unless that's where they were getting the money, was this in essence child prostitution ring they had going. And why didn't a red flag pop up around the money as well? That's
Well, it wasn't one of the red flags that one of the two had a previous, I don't know if it was a conviction, but a
it
previous
wasn't the
sex
article said it
charge.
wasn't a conviction.
Okay.
So at that
So it
point,
might not have shown up.
well, at one point, at that point, it's really difficult because you could have had an accuser without a crime.
Hmm.
That does exist, accusers without crimes. And if it never was charged, at some point you go through an extra part of the process to vet the
It
person.
should at
But
least be a red flag that slows things down and makes you take a
mhm.
deeper look just to make sure. Um, where I disagree with you is now I didn't see what you saw, so I don't know how much cudgeling was going on, but I think the gay aspect of this couple is part of the story, should be part of the story. And we've referenced this before, um, back when we talked about Jordan Peterson with Dave Rubin, um, having a very frank conversation about, okay, well, you are two men, which means this is what you will be lacking while you try to raise this child. These are things that we should be talking about when it comes to issues like this, when it comes to homosexual couples having children, adopting children, whatever. That's one of the things that should be an honest and frank conversation that should be able to be talked about rather than what seems to have happened here. And what I know from stories in the past have happened is that Christian adoption agencies get pressured by LGBTQ activists to make sure they allow gay couples to adopt. Well, there should be some red flags there. There should be some concern there. One of the other things we're not allowed to talk about, and I know he's lost his mind recently, but the reason Milo Yiannopoulos had to be excised from society was because he was talking openly and frankly about how many homosexual young men, their first experience is as a teenager with an older man. The grooming and pederasty in the homosexual community is a problem. And it's a uniquely uh, systemic problem with men because of our sex drive.
Well, yeah, you did that last point you made is probably the best one you made the whole time. The problem is it shouldn't be in and of itself a red flag, but it does need to be something where we acknowledge to the point that we know we have to go through a greater vetting process. It, even if it's on a follow-up standpoint, like, were these people being visited by social workers to check in on the kids, that kind of thing. But no, you're right. We're, to me, other than an awareness kind of standpoint, and we'll go into that in just a second, but to me, the only real place for gay or LGBTQ or all of that here is the fact that the political pressure is the problem. It's not the people themselves. These
Well, and these
people,
two in particular were activists, were radical
yeah,
political
and the
activists.
only reason these two people probably ended up in the situation where they were at was because of the political pressure. Because again, the article said it was a very short process. It was no questions asked
Hmm.
because you weren't allowed to ask questions. And there might have been so many things that came up if we had gone through the normal process and we had some sort of follow-up system, uh, approximating, at least being able to have access to the kids and make sure that there's no signs of abuse going on. I'm surprised with the way that this turned out that the teachers in their school didn't pick it up, because some of this stuff seems pretty brutal.
Yeah.
Uh, this is one of the problems with having all the lockdowns with schools. Most abuse is picked up with by teachers and school counselors. That's where most of reports of abuse come from. Uh, and a lot of kids were left without that for a long time. Uh,
I'm not done bashing the gays, so
okay, well, let me give
go
you a
ahead.
reality
Okay.
that's going to semi support your
Hmm.
point, but it's not it's not as supportive as you would think because it allows us to have insight in how we could do it better.
Hmm.
There is a genetic component. This is why I thought it tied in with what we just talked about with obesity. There is a genetic component, but it pre uh it's like gives you a pre propensity for something. Then there's a prenatal component. How much testosterone is your mom pumping out at that time? How much are you getting fed? Is there something developmental that could be shifting these things that are in your brain? That, I mean, we're by default mode females. And then that Y chromosome comes in and affects that whole process. And we start becoming males as men. And then if there's a disruption to that, how male you become gets disrupted. And we can go to the true intersex as an extreme example of that. They come out looking like girls because that process was so disrupted that they never developed as a boy, except for deep, deep up inside themselves, which you don't find till they're a teenager. So we are genetically, because we have a Y chromosome, boys, but what happens in the womb determines how much boy we are, which also will determine sexual preference at some point. And then there's developmental, which is what you talked about with Milo, right? What things along the road are happening with your already predetermined disposition that are guiding you into your maturation? Because we're a bundle of synapses as a baby, and that actually reduces as we get older because you're basically narrowing down your focus to your environment. And so all of those things are going to play into it. Now, here's the part that you're going to like. How many other things are connected to these same developmental, since we're default mode normal? I hate to use the word normal. Our default mode is I'm going to be born and I'm going to try to have babies as a man. That's because we're a sexually reproducing species, right? So that's default mode. You're not in default mode because something went wrong. What other things were affected by that? And that's where it becomes a very taboo, but I think scientifically legitimate argument, because how much of the brain function that would say produce a sadist is associated with that same that sexual desire center? Because a sadist is a sadist because they take pleasure from the things they do. So how much interconnection, or how much just the fact that you're in that environment that shifted your development, how much did that shift that other part? How much? And so we do see higher numbers of these things. We see body dysmorphia in the trans community. Body dysmorphia is its own thing, but it seems to be coincidental with all of these other things that would make you want to be the opposite sex, right? So how many of these things are connected? And we need to understand that and then take that into account, because now, okay, so maybe we come out with sadists are very highly correlated with homosexual men. I'm not making that statement, but maybe say that's one thing on the table. Well, we have things that help us determine if someone's a sadist. This guy, the quiet one, not the high functioning one. What was he was Zachary was the quiet one.
I can't remember.
The one the family said was creepy. Because remember, they were in the article, it talks about how they were polar opposites. One was basically
Yeah.
a high functioning narcissist, and the other one was very withdrawn and creepy. And he was the one actually doing most of the abuse while the functioning
Hmm.
one was filming it. But the actions he was taking were very sadistic.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm trying to, I need to stop looking at that. It's gonna
Well,
make me upset.
and then now let's go to the other end. These narcissistic uh having your self-worth based on basically the attention you get, personality traits, and we've got a flamboyant type personality trait that seems to be very very correlated with the homosexuality kind of
Mhm.
motif. Well, so now we've got other personality traits which we have a potentially harmful one with something that could be pretty much benign. Homosexuality in itself only hurts the person that can't have a kid because they don't have the desire to do the thing they need to do to have a kid, right? But when all of these other things play into it, now we're talking about the things they do uh, socially with everybody else in society. And if there's a correlation between them, then we know what to look for.
And that's kind of where I was going with the with bringing up Milo Yiannopoulos is and why I prefaced it with bringing up Dave Rubin talking with Jordan Peterson is um that would have been a possibly been a very different conversation if um if Dave Rubin had had what Milo called the typical um gay experience. But Ruben has been open that he realized he was gay because he grew up normal and he had all these relationships with, girls and young women, and they were wholly unsatisfying. That it never did anything for him. And that's when he finally came to terms with the fact that, oh, because I'm homosexual, this is
Mhm.
just not doing anything for me. But if he had had, Milo's experience, then you would need to talk about that. You would need to say, because we know that people who suffer trauma and do not deal with that trauma are more likely to repeat a cycle of abuse. That's something that needs to be talked about openly and frankly. Were you groomed and abused as a child or a teenager by an older man? Okay, well, you need to deal with that because now you're the older man. And if you want to break that cycle, then you need to talk about that openly, not necessarily publicly, but openly with a professional and deal with that trauma, or you're
Yeah,
going to pass it on.
but I don't think we can say this is specific to this community because I mean that would be the same with all abuse. If you were physically abused, you are more likely to be a physical
Well, it,
abuser
it
as
is
a parent.
it is possible that it is a bigger problem in this community, but to your point
Well, just
earlier
in that
about
specific thing
no,
in
no,
your
that's what I'm talking.
sexuality. Whereas I mean, abuse they takes on many forms. Again, if I was beaten by my father or stepfather and I grow up, there's a much greater than what we would love chance of me
Hmm.
being someone who physically abuses my child. And so in Milo's case, he may recognize in this maybe I hate to get into his head because it's Milo, but maybe he's seen or felt the urge to do the same thing that happened to him. But that's an
That
abuse thing. That's
mhm.
not. Uh,
No, but my point is, and tying to what you were talking about with we just don't have data because we're not looking at these things and we're not allowed to talk about these things, is that anecdotally, Milo's not the only one who has talked about this and said that this is very prevalent in the gay community. So it is possible that this is a major red flag and very, to his words, very prevalent in the gay community. We don't know, but we
well,
should.
we do have some numbers, and this is abuse in general. Again, I think it's 2/3 or 3/4. It's one of those, which is pretty close either way. 2/3 or 3/4 of child molesters are not pedophiles. It's a dominance thing. It's a I own you thing. Real pedophiles, a lot of them struggle, and hopefully they get help. It's a smaller number. It might be just because there's a smaller number of people that have that urge to begin with, but it 2/3 to 3/4 of child molestation are not pedophiles. So with that in mind, you can play that across all sexualities. So these people, again, this guy wanted to cause these children pain. He had an object for his desire to cause people pain. I don't think I don't think he could have done the things he did and, for better or worse language selection, gotten off if he had not been hurting the children in the process. If he had groomed them in a more pleasurable way, I don't think he would have done it.
There was still a sexual component, and there was certainly a sexual
No,
component
no.
for
For
everyone
these
else
sadists,
involved.
the
Yeah.
pain is part of the sexual component.
Mhm.
And in a healthy, a more healthy manifestation of it, you have a dom sub adult consensual relationship where someone likes a little bit of pain and you just happen to like to give a little bit of pain, and hopefully you got a safe word and everybody's fine in the end because it's two consensual adults and you're doing it respectfully. Whereas part of the pleasure was the dominance and the ability to take this from somebody who didn't want it.
There's a good trigonometry episode. Where was it? Back on January 8th with Helen Joyce, talking about the trans explosion of why it's such a big deal. And she makes the point that, um, you know, not that long ago, a part of the trans community, it was simply a fetish. And, guys who get off on wearing women's clothing, it was a fetish.
Autogynephilia.
It happened in private. Maybe you would go out to be transgressive, but and that was her point, is that people who have this transgressive urge or desire or fetish, since so much is now becoming normalized, it's not enough. You can't
So you're talking like a
satisfy that
concept creep.
urge.
You're talking like a
So there's a,
concept creep.
a
Yeah.
concept creep as well. And there is a concern to me that by so normalizing homosexuality, and then the rapid escalation of the past few years of lumping that into the rainbow mafia, the ever-growing list of letters there, that you're going to create a concept creep, because you've got the Dave Rubins of the world that just want to live a normal life that just so happens to involve a sexual attraction to the same sex. But you got a whole bunch of, I mean, for crying out loud, just, you know, look at gay pride parades and, the amount of fetish gear that is being worn by people during those parades. It's one of the reasons us stuffy Christian conservatives would rail against when Disney would have, gay day, or when there would be public gay pride parades. And it's you're walking around in public in a very sexual way, performing very sexual acts, but we can't stop that because, it's a human rights, it's a civil rights issue. And there is a major component of the, who knows how much, but it's certainly significant, especially when you look at the more vocal parts of it, that the point for them was to be transgressive. So now what do you do when it's no longer transgressive? What comes next?
This is where we get into slippery slope analysis arguments as well. And to your point, I think we do need to define what is too much at some point. And we have to do that before it goes too far down one hill or the other, and by both sides. Because there is the creep that would go the other way if we overreact, where all of a sudden, we're putting hijabs on people, right? So it's
Well, we'd have to get a long way before then because we've gone so far. The pendulum has swung so far the other way. We'd have to go a long way
well,
before we
but
get
that
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 became a problem.
usually increases the rebound.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. So we have to find a way to creep back to what we could probably decide is a pretty reasonable ground. And that could even vary state to state because some places are more conservative than others and some places are more liberal than others. So, but there has to be some sort of, well, yes, this is too far. And this is where I'm mad at the left because they are defending some of the things that are so obviously too far that everybody knows we have sexy time with Sam. I am a very laissez-faire sexuality between consenting adults person, but some of that does need to happen in private.
Hmm.
In fact, a lot of it does. There are a lot of things I would do in private that I would not put in front of even another adult that
I
didn't
don't want
want
to
to
see
see
you
it.
drop trow and take a dump in the park, Same principle. So I also don't want to see you doing, personal, private, biological things in public.
Well, and
There are
then
other
there's
things.
just here's a good litmus test. Kind of get rid of some hangups to be not be too ultra conservative about it. But what would make you go, oh God, I didn't need to see that? There's your test right there.
Hmm.
Oh, dang it, get a room. That's a good test right there. If something doesn't hit that nerve like that, it's probably okay. Like a skirt that's a little shorter than some people would say is good, or someone a guy walking around shirtless, or a woman walking around in a bikini. Those are kind of things that, depending on what it looks like in the bikini or the guy without his shirt, most people are just gonna be like, oh, yeah, I would wear a shirt. It's kind of cold out here. But
Well, depending on the context for sure.
yeah,
Um, but we can't have those conversations because um let's just get political. There is a
it's
radical
been
mark
political.
there's a radical Marxist element to the left, uh to and left leaning people, and I mean that tactically, that there is uh there is a methodology to radical Marxism. And one of those things, I mean, you've got the book back there somewhere, Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. And one of the things you do is you don't engage in debate on the merits. It's all ad hominem. You attack the person, not the argument. You attack the person. So, for crying out loud, uh, one of the many awful things about Tony Anthony Fauci is his reaction to the AIDS epidemic. And one of those terrible things was this need to make everyone afraid, because if you pointed out that this is overwhelmingly prevalent in the community, and this is where we need to focus our efforts to save people's lives, then you were a homophobe.
Yeah.
Then you were
Well,
talking hate. No, hold on. I'm talking biological fact that 80 something percent of HIV positive infections are happening with homosexual men. We need to address that or people are going to die. Oh, you're just a homophobe.
and see, you see a little bit of a glimmer of hope then with the latest monkeypox thing, right? They tried to do it again, and the public said no. We
Yeah,
we
that's
we
true.
we we can see this. We can see now. All we have to do is shift that same mentality to this is about development of children, and they're not ready for everything all at once, and that can be just as harmful as monkeypox, right? Without going over the edge to say this whole lifestyle is evil, right? There is something to be said about do you, but behind closed doors. I mean, we have gay clubs, right? Keep it there.
Well, there's also something to be said for, you know, this is why I keep going back to the Dave Rubin and Jordan Peterson conversation, because it was so open and frank and uh cordial. Peterson was asking questions. He was making points, some of them uncomfortable points. And Rubin didn't get all butt hurt and bent out of shape and take it personally. It's okay. That's, you know, maybe a counter argument, maybe a adjustment, or I don't quite agree, or this, or, I hadn't thought of that. Let me think about that. Let me figure out how that impacts my life going forward, because bringing a child into the world is a big effing deal. So I'd better make sure that I'm doing it right, that I'm doing the best that I can. And there is an element of appropriateness that has been creeping in, and I'm going to go way back to the 90s and the Boy Scouts getting in trouble because one of their rules was that you could not be an openly gay scoutmaster. And to me, that made total sense, but it was homophobic. No, no, you don't want someone who is sexually attracted to that sex spending secluded time with that sex. It would be inappropriate for me
Well,
to be leading my daughter's Girl Scout troop. It's the same principle.
well, I've got a great example for that from my own professional career. I have a camera in my gym, and I have to turn it on physically every time, and I don't turn it on for everybody. But guess what? If someone says, train my 14-year-old volleyball girl, that camera would be on 24/7, or at least during every
Hmm.
second of that interaction. Because, first of all, it's just respectful to the parents to be transparent like that. And second, you never know what's going to be said.
Hmm.
And like I said, accusations without a crime happen. And gosh darn it, in that situation, you want to have your ass covered. So yeah, you do have to be cognizant of that. And realistically, I am wary of training young female athletes. So it's just inappropriate in some ways.
Hmm.
And when it is appropriate, at least be as transparent as possible to where there can be no room for error.
Hmm.
Uh, and again, you don't want that person being alone with these people without at least some way. And back in the 90s, you would have zero way of knowing they weren't doing anything inappropriate. It's just the
Hmm.
way it is. And like you said, it's not about calling all gay people pedophiles, but it is a person attracted to men working with boys versus, I mean, look at all these female teachers that are sleeping with their students, right? It's kind of been uncanny lately. But again, it's a female that's attracted to males, and some of these kids are hitting puberty early. And guess what? They're going to get a lot of that validation and attention being the hot teacher
Hmm.
that they might not be getting from other places. All of those things are very tough to resist.
Yeah, where's the meme you sent me? PE teachers back in our day.
Oh, I might have
Yikes.
it on here. Oh,
All right.
maybe that's going to be our thumbnail photo.
Okay. Well, do we want to dive a little deeper, or do we want to wrap it up with something a little more fun?
I
Uh,
think I vote wrap it up.
all right, well, pause for a second. Let me go refill my water because my throat's not happy.
Before we move on, I just wanted to kind of put everything, at least from where I was talking from my perspective, together, because this was a horrific incident where a
Hmm.
lot of things went wrong. and maybe a few things were completely random. But just like the reason why our airline system is so safe is because every crash is analyzed to every little bit of detail to the highest resolution possible to make sure it doesn't happen again. And these are opportunities to realistically highly analyze the situation to see what changes need to be made. And I talked about associating personality traits. You can do that in a very politically neutral way by making it a blanket policy with all people trying to adopt. Looking at patterns in the personality traits. Are they super high in extroversion and uh openness, or something along those lines? Do they have, because there are patterns with the triad traits too. If you're super high in extroversion and conscientiousness, you are more likely to be a high functioning narcissist, right? So there are patterns to these. Are you and super low in agreeableness? So where are you high, where are you low? Are Okay, so now we've got one. So what are the other things? We have questionnaires that can tell you where you rate on a sociopathic scale, on a Machiavellian scale, on a sedition scale. These things exist. We have them.
Mm-hmm.
And within the spectrum, you could be high on something and still be a perfectly normally functioning person. But there's still a signal there. I'm not even going to call it a flag. There's a signal there that maybe we want to do an in-person interview process, or maybe we want to do a more robust follow-up process. These are things we can take this horrific situation that's already happened and try to make the whole system better. And we're not doing that. Same thing we're seeing with, well, we're not doing that because it's political, because of the political air around it. It's causing the fight that clouds the actual improvement. We saw the same thing with policing. There are so many reforms we could have made there, and none of them were the reforms being demanded, and none of them were the steps being taken by the opposition side. So in fact, that side was trying to give cops more power without doing any reform. So
Yeah, back the blue. No, back good cops and good policing, and let's point out when it's crap.
So let's set those little movements aside and actually treat these like airline crashes. Let's overanalyze the things that happened, not the politics around the things that happened, because the politics are why some of these things happened. And the politics in that same vein is going to be why none of them are fixed. Because people go into adopted relationships in normal straight families and have negative results too. We might be able to eliminate a bunch of those too.
Yeah. Yep. I won't hold my breath though, because I'm a pessimist.
Well, no, I don't think it's going to happen either. But
Yeah.
that's why I really wanted to kind of keep it on the level when it came to not overreacting to this, and not making it about homosexuality or LGBTQ. Maybe we find a signal where that does have something that, and we have to also be open to that being a possibility. But realistically, there is still the possibility that it could end up being the other way around. But we've never studied it, so we don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're not going to study it so long as we can't have open and frank and honest and polite conversations about these things and ask these kinds of questions.
All right.
All right.
Football.
Let's move on to happier-ish, at least less severe and important topics.
Well,
That's the point of
depends on what
sports.
teams you like. Because San Francisco, I'm glad they didn't have an actual third QB out there, or he would have been struck by lightning. That's the way the game was going for them.
We were both half right or half wrong. Depends on where the glass is. Um, the Philly game went about how I expected. Just I was not expecting that much of a beatdown. But then again, when
I mean,
your QB goes out, what, about halfway through the first quarter? I think,
first or second drive.
yeah, it was
Yeah.
really early that he got knocked out, and then just I don't even know why they put him back in, because he only threw the ball a couple of times. the entire when they put him back in.
This is one of those decisions that might have been an improvement to put McCaffrey at QB and run a wildcat system the rest of the game,
Mm,
but it may or may not, because
yeah.
I think putting Purdy back in originally might have been good because you still have the question on the Eagles side is, can he throw the ball? We still don't
Yeah.
know if he can throw the ball now. But when it became clear that there was no threat of him throwing the ball, then maybe we make an
What
adjustment, because
when
then you
you're
would at least had another
yeah,
skill person on the field.
when you're down 3 scores and you're in the fourth quarter and you're just running the ball, running the ball, running the ball. Okay, that he can't pass the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, if we hadn't figured it out before then, we know now that this isn't going to work. And I was disappointed because I really wanted to see how the kid performed, because something that struck me that I didn't mention when I was ranting about the Cowgirls is um not just his undefeated streak, but in that stretch of games, he was like at the top or in the top three for QBR, yards, TD to interception ratio. He himself was doing very well as a quarterback. And what impressed me during the Cowboys Niners game is that the Cowboys defense up until that very last drive, throw that out because the offense was awful and all you needed was one freaking first down, and you went 3 and out and put the defense right back out there. But I digress. Stupid team. That the Cowboys defense was able to stifle Purdy and that 49ers offense. I mean, throw out that last drive, that was 95 yards and a touchdown. So until then, you had very few yards and only 12 points. But what was impressive is even though they stifled him, they didn't force him to make mistakes. They didn't get the turnovers. They didn't get the dumb plays. They didn't get the, oh, well, here it is. This is why rookies don't make it to the Super Bowl. There was never that moment in the Niners game. And to me, that
Mm-hmm.
was the most impressive is even with all the pressure they were able to put on him, he was making veteran decisions and
Yeah.
protecting the ball.
Well, and we saw with the first half of the Eagles game, even with the second string, which ultimately is the fourth string quarterback, the practice squad guy called up, uh, they tied the game, and their defense was holding up, and he was starting to get a rhythm, and he was starting to move the ball a little bit better. I Without that second quarterback injury, or even with Purdy in there to begin with, I think San Francisco takes that game almost handily.
They
Handily with Purdy, and then in a close game
Well,
with
I wouldn't say
Johnson.
handily. I think it probably would have ended up being kind of back and forth because the
No, I
Eagles
don't
were
think so,
very
because
efficient on that first drive.
on that first drive, but then
Yeah.
after that, they couldn't do anything until basically the San Francisco defense wore down. And they wore down because it was 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out on San Francisco side. Once all they were doing was handing the ball off. So I think I think I think the defense has a better showing in that second half, big time. So
They're
I don't
not
think
as
it would
worn
have been
down.
back and forth. And then the Philly defense, because they're pass rush oriented, would have started wearing down.
Uh, the other game. So because I'm old and spiteful, after the Niners Eagles game, and I'm fine with either team. So my thought was, who has the best chance to beat the Eagles? Because I'm old and spiteful. And I thought it was Cincy because Cincy to me has a more well-rounded roster than KC does. I'm not sure that KC, especially because so much is dependent on Mahomes' ankle, I don't know that they have the offensive weapons to beat Philly, but I was impressed with their defense. I was not expecting them to come up with that effective of a scheme to attack Cincinnati's offense.
Well, see, this is where I did better research then, because
Okay.
the Achilles heel to Cincinnati is protecting the quarterback. And KC just, how many sacks did he have in the first quarter? 4 sacks in the first quarter
Yeah.
alone.
Yeah.
And Burrow was on his back the whole time. And Philadelphia is better at rushing the passer than KC is. So I don't think Cincy had a chance against Philadelphia. I think Burrow would have been on his back too much. He would be another injury caused by the Philadelphia defense.
But they have a better running game, which is how you attack a pass rushing defense. So if they could get their running game going, then that would slow the pass rush.
Uh I like Pacheco with the Chiefs. I don't know why he didn't really take off in the last game. Well, since he's got a really good front four as well, but uh KC, it depends on how much they heal up, man. They were down to their kick returners playing wide receiver
Yeah.
in that game instead of they were losing people like flies, just like San Francisco was, and they still managed to pull it off. So if they
Yeah.
come in pretty decently healthy after the 2 week break, I think it's going to be a closer game. But I think they're just too beat up to take on a really rested and healthy Philadelphia right now.
Yeah. Yeah. They're playing annoyingly good, and I really don't want them to win another Super Bowl, but they're gonna.
Yeah,
That's my thinking is I hope it's a good game, but I'm concerned that this is gonna look a lot like the Tampa KC Super Bowl. And I don't know that Casey's going to be able to get much going on offense.
that was the one where KC was basically on practice squad offensive lineman, right?
Yeah, and Mahomes was just abused that whole game by
Well,
the Tampa D.
it depends on how much his leg heals. Which, you know what, I've been critical of Mahomes in the past, but I mean, if he really had a high ankle sprain and like they said no injections or anything, and he went out and played that game,
Hmm.
he got a few man card punches
It
that
is 2 weeks enough time for a high ankle sprain.
typically it's 3 to 5 weeks, which would be the third week technically because he played on it.
Hmm.
But I mean, it'll feel better than it did this last time, but it might be just a little nagging pain, which I think he'll be fine there.
Well, what gives me hope is that drive after Mahomes got hurt in the Jacksonville game. 95 yards with your backup quarterback to score a touchdown.
Mm-hmm.
So if the team as a whole, but then to your point, the whole season has been running or has been wide receiver by committee, and the committee has been disbanded. we I haven't looked at the follow-ups of those injuries, so I don't know what the status of those guys are, but man, that's going to be an issue.
Well, now they at least know to have a backup plan, and all of these plug and play guys that we're throwing in there are learning, 20, 30 more routes
Hmm.
to expand the playbook. Because once they had to put those guys in, the playbook went from that big giant 2 sheets these guys have to a little corner of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and we've seen that in Dallas a lot because that was the annoying thing about Romo, even though I like the guy, is every time he got hurt, you threw out the playbook.
Mm-hmm.
And they never had a backup that could run the playbook. They would always get these backups that were, you know, rejects and retreads from other people. Sorry, Brendan Whedon, go Pokes, but that did not work. Um, and and so as soon as he would go out, especially the couple of times he went out early in the season, it was, well, we're done. You just knew, all right, we're done, because they did not have a backup that could come in and perform to that level. So it will be interesting to see who actually plays wide receiver for KC and how well they play.
Well, I think with the nature of how the other guys got hurt, they'll at least suit up for the starting lineup, but there are also injuries that can reappear really quickly. It's not like a broken bone where once it heals, you're pretty much on a solid surface. I don't know what was up with Hartman's hip, but the other one was a groin, I think. And we'll see. We'll see. Smith Schuster was a head injury. So
Yeah.
that one could be cleared by this week, depending on how serious it was. It could be he doesn't play. But
Yeah.
I just looked at the odds. They gave the Eagles a slight Vegas odds favorite. I think my prediction is I don't think it's going to be a blowout, but I think it's going to be a two-score game, or maybe a two-score game where they score at the end, but
Hmm.
to close it, but at the same time they don't. It's
Doesn't
just
mean
too
much,
far.
yeah.
Yeah, too far to make up. So somewhere around there. I'll
Yeah.
say Philadelphia by 9.
That's kind of what I'm Philly in the low 30s, KC in the low to mid 20s is kind of how I see the game going.
But it really just depends on. I mean, if everybody comes out and Mahomes is running sprints and Smith Schuster and Hartman, and I don't know what the third receiver
Valdez
is.
Scantling.
Valdez Scantling. Oh, he was still healthy though. So
I
and
thought he went out late in the game. Did he not? Am
no,
I confused?
he was a big part of
Okay.
that kind of close the second to last drive where they scored and really started pulling away.
All right. Well, that's all I got on that. Do you have anything else you wanted to
Uh,
ramble about before we close it out?
Texans had a second interview with D'Amico Ryans, so that has the city excited. That's everybody around here's favorite pick, or most people. I think the Sean Payton thing died a long time ago, even amongst the fans.
Hmm.
But uh, but yeah,
I
that's
don't know that it was a good fit. Before the um before the off season gets going, I wanted to talk about how I would fix my team. I have no faith that they'll actually do this, but and this is something that has always made me scratch my head because Jerry talks about how he's not afraid to spend money and he's going to build a team. The place where you don't have a salary cap is in your coaching staff. So why aren't you breaking the bank to bring in the best people? Why do you hold on so long when it's clear that this guy's not going to get it done, Jason Garrett? I would go
what
all out to win the Sean Payton sweepstakes.
wasn't Kellen Moore fired?
I hadn't been paying attention. I knew a lot of the coaching staff was gone, but I don't know who all that included, because I stopped caring after that frustrating game. Um, but I I don't know what the plan is if you're keeping McCarthy, but you're gutting the rest of the staff. I would go all out to win the Sean Payton sweepstakes and have him bring someone in that's a because Payton is himself a good QB and offensive coach, but he's also running the whole team. Dak Prescott needs a quarterback whisperer. He needs someone that can talk to him the way he needs to be talked to and coach the way he needs to be coached to get the most out of him.
Well,
Because
that's
you're
the problem
stuck
with
with him
Sean
because of
Payton
the
is Sean Payton's always done the head coach offensive coordinator combo.
Mhm.
In similar news, Bill O'Brien's the new offensive coordinator of New England, which is
Hmm.
not only funny because screw ups keep moving up, but the Arizona is talking about trading D Hop to New England. And the whole thing with Texans are the slave owners and da da da, da was Bill O'Brien's beef with D Hop, which is why D Hop wanted to leave and basically priced him out of the Texans market. And so they could be reunited.
That'll be that'll be great. That'll be loads of fun. Oy. Um,
That's all I have for. We got to figure out our food for the Super Bowl party, but you're not going to be here this year anyway, so
no, I can't make the trip this year. So,
I can't do. I don't think I can do the brisket for KC because we got the symphony the night before, and I can't do the overnight
oh, that's a
thing.
bummer.
So maybe we'll figure out something with Kansas City that's kind of novel, and then we'll just do the Philly cheesesteaks again with Philadelphia. Those are good. I could eat those anytime.
Oh yeah. All right. Well, we'll see what happens, and we'll see y'all next time with more Lord of Chaos. It's
Yep.
chaotic.
Later.